This is story of the outlaw who had terrorized the nation in early 20th century. Edward Adams, known as Eddie, was born in 1887 on a farm in Hutchinson, Kansas as William Joseph Wallace. His father died when he was young and his mother remarried. He had a strong disdain for his stepfather, as well as for physical labor. He learned the barber trade and moved to Wichita in the early 20th century. There he met John Callahan and quickly became involved in bootlegging, petty robberies, and car theft. Eddie was handsome and charismatic, and attracted many women. His wife left him after growing weary of his illegal activities and infidelities. He soon formed his own gang and began committing bank and train robberies throughout Kansas, Missouri, and Iowa, eventually earning a reputation as the premier bandit in the Midwest by the early days of Prohibition. In 1920, through Callahan, Eddie formed a partnership with outlaw brothers Ray and Walter Majors and, on September 5, attempted a daylight robbery against a notorious Kansas City gambling den on Grand Avenue owned by Harry Trisdell. However, a shootout between the bandits and tough employees of the illegal casino would result in the death of gambler and gunman Frank Gardner and the eventual capture of the gang by police. Eddie was sentenced to life imprisonment in February 1921. The Majors brothers received lesser sentences by agreeing to plead guilty to robbery, and were both sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. Both brothers would eventually die in prison. A third Majors brother involved in the botched robbery attempt, Dudley, escaped from the scene only to be later arrested and serve time in Delaware. While being transported to the Missouri State Penitentiary in Jefferson City, Missouri, Eddie escaped custody by jumping off the train and several days later joined Julius Finney in the robbery of a bank and general store in Collison, Kansas. He was captured on February 17, 1921 near Garden Plain, Kansas by a posse, after wrecking a stolen car under a bridge. Convicted of bank robbery, Eddie was sentenced to serve 10 to 30 years at the Kansas State Penitentiary in Lansing, in addition to his life sentence in Missouri for murder. On August 13, Eddie once again successfully escaped imprisonment after sabotaging the prison power plant and scaling the prison walls during the night, along with inmates Frank Foster, George Weisberger, and D.C. Brown. The driver of the getaway car was Billy Fintelman, a World War I veteran who had turned to a life of crime. With the exception of Brown, who was recaptured days later, the fugitives would elude capture from state authorities and eventually formed what would become the newest incarnation of the Eddie's gang. By September of that year, joined by Fintelman, the gang robbed around $10,000 from banks in Rose Hill and Hayesville, Kansas. During the Hayesville robbery, Eddie's pistol whipped 82-year-old James Crevell for no apparent reason, who later died of a fractured skull. On October 8, police attempted to trap the gang near Anole, Kansas, however the gang managed to escape after a gunfight which left Deputy Benjamin Fisher wounded. The gang was spotted 11 days later after stealing $500 in silver from a bank near Osceola, Iowa. This was followed by another attempt by a posse to apprehend the gang just south of Murray, Iowa, where the gang rested for several hours along a gravel road just a few miles from town. Having spotted the gang's vehicle, suspicious farmer C.J. Jones contacted Murray Sheriff Ed West, and a group was formed to investigate and intervene. Upon approaching the vehicle, Sheriff West was met at point-blank range with a revolver to his face that failed to fire. He was able to take cover and a shootout followed in which several members of the posse were seriously injured. Jones, having heard the gun battle from his farm up the road, grabbed his shotgun and ran to aid Sheriff West and his group. The gang, who had by now fled from the original site, drove up the road and exchanged fire with Jones, which left him mortally wounded. Heading for Wichita, the gang's crime spree continued, robbing 11 stores in Muskota, Kansas, and abducting and later robbing 2 motorcycle officers outside Wichita, where their motorcycles were set on fire. The gang then committed their most successful robbery with the theft of $35,000 after robbing an express train near Ottawa, Kansas. On the evening of November 20, 1921, Eddie, along with Foster, Nellie Miles, a local madam and longtime friend of Eddie, George McFarland, a local thug and bootlegger, and 2 alleged prostitutes, were joyriding around Wichita. Another car carrying Fintelman, his wife, Weisberger, P.D. Orcutt, and 2 unnamed ladies, followed at high speeds. 2 motorcycle policemen pulled over the vehicle carrying Eddie and a gunshot came from the vehicle. It is unknown whether the shot was fired by Eddie or Foster, killing patrolman Robert Fitzpatrick. The outlaws sped away, released the women, and fled south into Cowley County. Later that night, the trio ran out of gas and stopped at a farm, where Eddie attempted to steal a vehicle from farmer George Oldham. When Oldham resisted, Eddie shot and killed him. Eddie and Foster took the car, while McFarland ran away alone into the night. The duo returned to Wichita in the stolen car. The next day, Eddie and Billy Fintelman went to McFarland's house to look for him, only to find 2 officers waiting. Eddie shot Officer Ray Kastner non-fatally while the other policeman hid under a bed. Eddie once again escaped. Eddie hid out until the funeral of fallen Officer Fitzpatrick on November 22, at which he assumed the bulk of the police force would be present. He had planned to rent a car to leave town for good, but the proprietor of the garage recognized him and contacted police. 3 officers arrived on the scene. Eddie shot at them, fatally wounding Detective Charles Hoffman, who had pulled Eddie to the ground. Officer Charles Bowman was also hit by gunfire. D.C. Stuckey, hiding behind a pillar, shot Eddie 3 times and killed him. Eddie Adams' body was publicly displayed in the city undertaking parlor in a grisly celebration of the end of a reign of terror. More than 9,000 people viewed the slain outlaw. In the end, 18 people were arrested as accomplices of Eddie. 4 were sent to the Kansas State Penitentiary, including Frank Foster, who was sentenced to remain there for life.